The gym was silent, save for the rhythmic thud of leather against heavy bags and the sharp, piercing beep of the interval timer. But that atmosphere was about to shatter into a million unanswerable questions. It is a scene that plays out in gyms all across the world. The hierarchy of the strong versus the weak, the trained versus the untrained, the lion versus the mouse. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the lion was a celebrated black belt, a man whose entire identity was wrapped in the color of the fabric tied around his waist and the trophies lining the shelf behind the reception desk. The mouse, or so everyone thought, was a quiet, middle-aged man named Bayani, whose only weapon appeared to be the mop he used to clean the sweat off the mats after the warriors had finished their training. When the challenge was issued, it wasn't done with malice, but with a casual, laughing arrogance, a just-for-fun sparring session intended to create content for a social media channel. The camera was rolling, the students were snickering, and the outcome seemed preordained by the laws of physics and reputation. But what happened in the next 3 minutes didn't just silence the room. It dismantled the ego of everyone watching and exposed a secret that had been hiding in plain sight, disguised by a grey maintenance uniform. To understand the gravity of the moment, you first have to understand the cathedral of ego where this event took place. This was a high-end combat sports facility, the kind with neon lighting, brand new pristine mats, and a membership fee that cost more than what Bayani likely earned in a week. It was a place where strength was the only currency that mattered, and Marcus, the black belt at the center of this story, was the wealthiest man in the room. Marcus was a specimen of modern athletic training. 6 feet tall, explosive, and technically precise in a style of sport karate that looks fantastic on video. He was used to being the alpha, the one who dictated the pace, the one who tapped people out or scored the points. He walked with that specific swagger that comes from years of dominating controlled environments. For him, the gym was a stage, and everyone else was just a supporting actor. He had never really looked at Bayani. To Marcus, and to most of the members, the cleaner was part of the furniture, a ghost that ensured the locker rooms were stocked with towels and the floors were dry. They didn't see a man, they seen a function. This blindness was the first fatal error in a series of miscalculations that Marcus was about to make. Bayani, on the other hand, was the definition of unassuming. He was a Filipino expatriate, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and the weathered skin of someone who had worked manual labor for decades. He moved with a slight shuffle when he mopped, head always bowed in a posture of perpetual service and humility. In a gym filled with loud grunts, dropped weights, and aggressive music, Bayani was silence personified. He would navigate around the fighters, waiting for them to move so he could clean a spot, never making eye contact, never imposing his presence. What nobody in that gym knew was that Bayani's silence wasn't born of fear, it was born of discipline. They didn't know about the history he carried in his muscle memory, a history that originated in the muddy backstreets of a province in the Philippines, where martial arts weren't about trophies or belts, but about survival and heritage. He was invisible to them, and in the world of true combat, invisibility is the ultimate advantage. While Marcus practiced moves designed to score points for judges, Bayani belonged to a lineage that practiced moves designed to neutralize threats efficiently and completely. The gap between these two philosophies was about to be bridged in the most shocking way possible. The inciting incident was innocuous enough, born from boredom and the insatiable need for digital engagement. Marcus had finished his drills and was looking for a light way to cool down while his cameraman filmed a vlog entry for his channel. He scanned the room, his eyes skipping over the exhausted sparring partners, and landed on Bayani, who was wringing out a mop near the ring ropes. A smirk tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth. It was meant to be a joke, a classic fish-out-of-water segment where the pro teaches the novice a move, or perhaps lightly spars with him to show the difference in levels. "Hey, Bayani!" Marcus called out, his voice booming across the facility. "You watch us every day. You think you can throw a punch? Come on, put the gloves on. Just one round. For fun." The gym went quiet. The request hung in the air, heavy with awkwardness. It wasn't exactly bullying. Marcus was smiling, his tone was friendly, but there was an underlying pressure. It was a king summoning a jester. Bayani paused, his hands gripping the wooden handle of the mop. He looked up, smiling that polite, deferential smile he always wore, and shook his head gently. No, sir. I have to finish the floor. Boss will be angry. But the crowd, sensing entertainment, began to pile on the pressure. It's a strange psychological phenomenon where a group will urge someone into an uncomfortable situation simply to break the monotony of the day. Come on, Bayani. Show us what you got, shouted one of the regulars. Marcus will go easy on you, don't worry, yelled another. The cameraman moved closer, zooming in on Bayani's reluctant face. The dynamic had shifted. Refusing now would look like cowardice or disrespect, even though Bayani had every right to say no. Marcus, feeling the energy of the room, walked over and draped a pair of spare gloves over the cleaner's shoulder. Just light tapping, my friend. I promise I won't hurt you. Just show me how you would defend yourself. Bayani looked at the gloves, then at Marcus, and finally at the camera lens that was invading his personal space. Something in his eyes shifted. The deference remained, but the sparkle of the servant vanished, replaced by a calm, flat resolve. He sighed, a long exhale through his nose, and slowly began to unbutton his grey work shirt. Underneath, he wore a faded, stretched-out white undershirt. He nodded once. Okay. Just for fun. The visual contrast as they stood in the center of the mat was striking, almost comical. On one side stood Marcus, clad in the latest designer compression gear, his gloves taped perfectly, his stance wide and bouncy, radiating athletic potential. On the other side stood Bayani in his baggy work trousers and undershirt, looking like a dad who had wandered into the wrong room looking for the restroom. He didn't adopt a traditional boxing stance or the deep karate horse stance Marcus used. Instead, Bayani stood relatively upright, his feet shoulder-width apart, his hands open and floating casually in front of his chest, not in a tight guard, but in a loose, fluid position. To the uninitiated, he looked unprepared. To a trained eye, however, there were warning signs. Bayani wasn't bouncing. He was rooted. His center of gravity was low, and his eyes weren't looking at Marcus's face or his gloves. They were fixed on the center of Marcus's chest, the point from which all limb movement originates. The timer beeped to start the round. Marcus tapped his gloves together and grinned, throwing a lazy, probing jab, expecting Bayani to flinch or cover his face in panic. Bayani didn't blink. He simply swayed his head a fraction of an inch, letting the glove sail past his ear. The first 30 seconds were a confusing dance for Marcus. He was operating at perhaps 20% of his capacity, throwing telegraphed punches and flashy high kicks that were meant to look good on camera without making heavy contact. He expected Bayani to stumble, to back away, or to flail his arms wildly. But Bayani was doing none of those things. The cleaner was moving in a way that defied the geometry of the sport Marcus knew. Bayani moved in triangles. Every time Marcus stepped forward, Bayani stepped off at a 45-degree angle, causing Marcus to constantly have to reset his feet. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the audience, but frustrating for the fighter. Marcus threw a roundhouse kick, a signature move. Bayani didn't retreat. He stepped in, checking the kick with his shin and simultaneously checking Marcus's shoulder with his lead hand. It was a soft touch, but it disrupted Marcus's balance completely. The black belt stumbled, his rhythm broken. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room, not at Bayani, but at the awkwardness of Marcus losing his footing against the janitor. Marcus's ego, bruised by the stumble and the lack of a highlight reel moment, decided it was time to stop playing. The smile vanished. He signaled to himself that he would land one solid, controlled shot to the body to assert dominance and end the charade. He ramped up his speed, snapping a sharp 1-2 combination, a jab followed by a straight cross, aimed right at Bayani's solar plexus. It was a speed that would have caught most trained students off guard. This was the moment the atmosphere in the room changed from amusement to shock. As the cross came flying in, Bayani didn't block it. He parried it with his left hand, guiding the punch past him, and in the same fluid motion, his right hand snaked out. He didn't punch, he slapped. It was a quick, stinging backhand to the inside of Marcus's bicep, followed instantly by a check to the neck. It wasn't a knockout blow. It was a control technique. Bayani had effectively defanged the snake, momentarily numbing the arm and stopping Marcus's forward momentum dead in its tracks. The sound was a sharp thwack, distinct from the dull thud of a glove. This was the revelation of Filipino martial arts, specifically the principles found in Kali or Arnis. In the Philippines, these arts are often taught without uniforms, without belts, and without fanfare. They are systems designed for dirty fighting, for weapons, and for handling multiple opponents. What Bayani was displaying was gunting, scissoring, and limb destruction. He wasn't trying to score points. He was attacking the limbs that were attacking him. Marcus, confused and now angry, reset and lunged forward with a grappling attempt, trying to grab Bayani's collar to throw him. This was a mistake. As Marcus reached out, Bayani's hands became a blur. He intercepted the reaching arm, wrapped it, and pivoted. It wasn't strength, it was leverage. In a split second, the celebrated black belt was spun around, his arm twisted behind his back in a standing hammerlock. Bayani stood close behind him, totally in control, whispering something that the camera microphone barely picked up. "Careful, sir. Balance." Then, just as quickly, he released Marcus and stepped back to the center, resuming his calm, waiting stance. The gym was now dead silent. The snickering had evaporated. The cameraman had stopped moving, transfixed by what he was seeing through the lens. Marcus turned around, his face a mixture of red-hot embarrassment and genuine confusion. He was a black belt, he knew how to escape holds, he knew how to strike. But he was fighting a ghost. Every time he tried to grab water, it slipped through his fingers. The reality was setting in that the man he had handed a mop to every day possessed a skill set that was entirely foreign to the structured, rule-bound world of the gym. Marcus looked at Bayani with new eyes. He saw the calloused knuckles, the forearms that were thick from manual labor, and realized that those muscles were also built from thousands of repetitions of stick and knife drills. The fun was over. Marcus roared, a primal sound of frustration, and unleashed a flurry of punches, abandoning technique for sheer volume, trying to overwhelm the cleaner with aggression. What followed was a masterclass in the flow. In Filipino martial arts, this state is often developed through drills like hubad-lubad, where practitioners learn to sense energy and redirect it without thinking. As Marcus threw wild hooks and uppercuts, Bayani seemed to be swimming through the attacks. He parried, he ducked, he weaved, and he checked. He was constantly tapping Marcus's arms, disrupting the timing, pushing the black belt off balance every time he planted his feet to throw power. It was like watching a bull try to gore a matador, but the matador wasn't using a cape, he was using his bare hands. Bayani wasn't even breathing heavy. His face remained a mask of placid concentration. He wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to not lose, and in doing so, he was dismantling Marcus completely. At one point, Marcus threw a heavy kick to the thigh. Bayani didn't just block it. He stepped in and swept Marcus's standing leg. It was gentle, almost polite, but Marcus hit the mat with a heavy thud, staring up at the ceiling lights, wondering how he had ended up there again. The climax of the sparring session came when Marcus, exhausted and desperate, tried a spinning back fist, a high-risk, high-reward move he had seen in movies. He spun with velocity, hoping to catch Bayani by surprise. But Bayani had read the telegraphing hips before Marcus had even completed the turn. As Marcus spun, Bayani simply stepped in close, inside the arc of the spinning arm, and placed a hand on Marcus's chest and another on his lower back. With a subtle twist of his hips, he used Marcus's own rotational momentum against him. Marcus flew. He didn't just fall, he was launched by his own force, guided by Bayani, tumbling across the mats and ending up entangled in the ropes. Bayani stood there, hands open, waiting. He didn't celebrate. He didn't taunt. He simply waited to see if the customer wanted more service. Marcus untangled himself, panting heavily, sweat pouring down his face, his expensive gear in disarray. He looked at Bayani, then looked around the room at the stunned faces of his students. The interval timer buzzed loudly, signaling the end of the round. The sound of the buzzer seemed to snap the room out of a trance. Usually, this is the part where the fighters touch gloves and say good match. But Marcus stood there for a long moment, processing the paradigm shift that had just occurred. He had been humbled, thoroughly and completely, by a man who scrubbed the toilets. But to Marcus's credit, the martial artist in him eventually overrode the egoist. He walked over to Bayani, but he didn't offer a fist bump. He bowed. It was a deep, traditional bow, lower than he usually gave to his own instructors. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, gasping for air. "What style is that?" Bayani smiled, the intensity vanishing from his face as he buttoned his grey work shirt back up. "Just Arnis, sir. From my grandfather. We played with sticks in the province. Just playing." He downplayed it, as true masters often do. He didn't mention that he was likely a master or a grandmaster in his home village, or that he had been training since he could walk. To him, it wasn't something to brag about, it was just something you did. The aftermath of that sparring session rippled out far beyond the walls of the gym. The video, of course, was uploaded. It didn't have the clickbait title Marcus originally intended. It was titled simply, "The Cleaner." It went viral within hours. Viewers from around the world analyzed the footage, pointing out the subtle checks, the nerve strikes, and the beautiful footwork of the Filipino system. Comment sections were filled with stories of people who had underestimated unassuming elders, only to find out they were retired special forces or hereditary masters of combat arts. It became a lesson in the digital age. Appearance is nothing. The shiny gear, the high production value, the loud talk, none of it matters when the hands start moving. Bayani became an overnight folk hero, a symbol for the quiet, hard-working immigrant who possesses hidden depths of dignity and skill. But the most profound change happened inside the gym itself. The atmosphere shifted. The arrogance that had coated the place like a layer of dust was wiped away. Students began to look at Bayani differently. They didn't just see a cleaner anymore. They saw a resource. They saw a man. Some of the more humble students started asking him for tips on footwork or hand speed. Marcus, having swallowed the bitter pill of public defeat, actually asked Bayani if he would teach a seminar on knife defense and close-quarters combat. Bayani accepted, but on one condition: he would still keep his cleaning job because he needed the steady income for his family back home. And so, the gym became a strange paradox, a place where the man mopping the floor was also the most dangerous man in the room, and where the black belts learned to bow to the man in the grey uniform. It was a stark reminder that in life, as in fighting, the most formidable opponents are often the ones you never see coming. Bayani picked up his mop, dipped it in the bucket, and went back to work, the silent guardian of the mats he had just conquered.